Good evening, everyone. I, CA Pragyajan, on behalf of Professional Skill Enrichment Committee (ICI), welcome all the participants in today's webcast on sharpening your professional edge, skill building, knowledge sharing, and holistic growth for chartered accountants. First of all, I welcome today's resource person, CA Saket Mehrotra ji, and other present over here. So it's my great privilege to introduce today's speaker in this webcast, Mr. Saket ji. Mehrotra is a chartered accountant by profession. He has overseen over 2,000 plus credit in asset across treasury and family office functions. He started his career in ITC Limited, having worked both in corporate finance and hotel divisions. He had a brief stint with Morris International, after which he has been actively managing equities for one of the largest family offices in East India. Saket ji's career spans around 10 years and he actively contributes to publications like investing.com, ET, Money Control, and also has been invited as a guest speaker for various brokerage house in India. Saketji writes actively in his newsletter Beta 2 Alpha, which he widely read across 40 plus countries. Very nice. Sir, let me tell you, question will be provided during the session as and when asked by the participant in the chat box. And again, we welcome you in this webcast, sir. Over to you. Webcast is all yours, Saketji.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the lovely introduction. Pleasure to be here amongst the respected members who've signed up for this webcast. And let me just present my screen and we can get started right away. Uh, is my presentation visible?
Yes, sir.
Great,
Yes, Saket.
great. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. Today, I'll be presenting on this topic called sharpening your professional edge. And generally, whenever I have to make a presentation, the presentation is covered around the world of investing. So, you will often see me use a few examples from that world when we talk about sharpening your professional edge. Although this is something that I have been actually quite excited about in terms of as professionals how do we make sure we are hitting new levels of benchmarks that are set a for our own selves and b in terms of understanding how the market is, right? So Pragya ji has already given an introduction. I have almost spent close to 10 years now in the corporate world amongst multiple companies, and now I'm full time into managing equities, so that's where I kind of operate. There have been publications you would have seen me write for some of these houses, and also you would also find me do a lot of content on YouTube. So there are a few channels here and there where I've talking about long form investing practices in general. Uh, so in terms of the flow of today's presentation, right? What we'll start with, we'll talk about skill building in detail. Um we'll get to how is it that you can use knowledge sharing to your advantage to make sure your career is growing the right way and you're making sure that you're hitting the goals, or let's say the benchmarks or the milestones that you're setting for yourself. And then finally, there's no growth or there's no professional edge without talking about holistic growth. So we'll cover that as well, right? So this covers multiple things, right? So one is obviously how do you find the right career path. So since all of us are chartered accountants, we've gone through, uh, I would say, rigorous rounds of, let's say, tests, and at the same time also spent a lot of time ensuring that our practical training happens the right way. So clearly, we are already exposed to a large part of how the corporate world or how the professional world works. But over and above, because today we live in a world where things are changing every day, and we are seeing disruptions happening as we speak, right? A few months ago, or let's say a few years ago, there was no mention about artificial intelligence anywhere. And suddenly, whether you are ordering something online, whether you are going for a movie, there are always algorithms that play behind the engine, right? And a large part of what people did in terms of applying their knowledge, in terms of understanding, okay, this is where my edge lies, that is getting replaced by some of these new tools that are coming on a day to day basis. But having said all of that, it's always worthwhile to think in this today, in this world today, where there are so many tools available at our disposal, a lot of things are getting automated on their own. How do I make my own edge, right? And exactly how do you ensure that your professional edge keeps staying sharp, or how do you understand that, okay, this is something which is worthwhile to do, or this is something which is not worthwhile to do. So we'll try and cover uh, some bit of that. Now, uh, this broadly is gonna be our today's presentation for the next 120 odd minutes that we have for today. And to put it as, I would say, subtly, or to put it as detailed, uh, to put it in as detailed manner as possible, we'll try and cover each of these aspects in detail, right? So let's start. Now, when you think of the word edge, right? We are talking about sharpening our professional edge. What exactly comes to your mind, right? Can any of you take a guess? The live chat is open. I believe even I can access the live chat. Pragya ji, is that possible? Uh, Okay, we'll wait for her to get back. So, see, the thing is, the session has to be as interactive as possible, right? So, when we say edge, what exactly does come to your mind? In fact, I'm going to actually use an example from the world of casinos or the world of gambling to make it interesting, right? So, when you think of edge, let me today break it down to you as mathematically as possible, right? All of us have seen this game. Maybe some of us have had the privilege to play it, some of us have not played it, but this is the game of a roulette. It's called a roulette. There are multiple forms and ways in which it's played. But to put it as, I mean, to just give you a plain vanilla explanation of what a roulette is, there is a ball that spins and there are 36 numbers on the dial, and there's one number which is this, right? It's a zero, right? But generally, what people want to bet on is a number between 1 to 36, right? You will hardly find people betting on zero, right? And that is what the edge of the house is. So you would have also read this term, which is very famously called the house always wins, right? So everyone talks about the fact that, okay, if you own a casino and tomorrow, let's say you and I start this business, we'll always make money. But how do we make money is the question, because you would see these fancy food, fancy beverages, all of this is given to free to people so that they continue gambling. But then, if everyone's here to continuously keep gambling, and they're given this value proposition, okay, you can win 50x, you can win 100x, how does the house make money, right? So the answer, ladies and gentlemen, lies in very small inputs into various games. So inside a casino, there are multiple games. There are so roulette was one which I mentioned to you. You would have seen these machines. These are called slots, right? So you put a coin, you press the lever, and there are multiple matches that come through, which make you understand whether you're going to win or not. So to define edge, right? And this is where the concept of edge comes into play. It's a mathematical definition. There's something called house edge, which is how much money you're betting minus how much is the payout that the house is giving, right? Divided by the number that you're betting into 100 is your house edge. To make it as simple as possible, as I said, in the game of roulette, there are these 37 numbers you can bet on, right? There is a high chance so when you bet on these numbers, you can either bet on red or black. There is no green bet that you can make, right? And that is where the edge of the house lies. Which means if you are making a bet on these numbers between 0 to 37, and generally people bet either red or black. No one bets on green. And this is where the house makes its edge, which is almost close to 2.7%, which means mathematically speaking, if there's 100 rupees spent on this roulette table, the house will make 2.7 rupees in a day, right? That is what the edge of the house is, right? Similarly, we can do this math for slots. There are different ways in which you can calculate this, but this was just to give you a simple explanation of what exactly an edge is. Uh, the edge number for slot machine can go as high as 10%, which is why you'll often see a lot of old people play this game. Most of the casinos would want a lot of the slot machines lying throughout the gaming arena, so that because these are big revenue generators for the casino. So this is how you can mathematically define what an edge is, right? And again, if you think about this picture, right, it's basically a sharpened pencil which has worn out. So the other point that comes to an edge, or when you talk about edge, is that edge is a continuous process, which means it doesn't matter if you've built an edge once. If you're using that edge on multiple occasions, if you're using that edge every day, the edge keeps getting worn out, which is why, as professionals, as individuals, no matter what we do, no matter where we are, it is important to continuously have a process in which we are upgrading our knowledge and which we are upgrading our learning process. So having an edge is a continuous process, is the message which is there, right? Now again, let's do another thought experiment, right? Generally, and you would have heard this in multiple case studies here and there. So when we talk about learning and skill building, which is basically the first part of today's presentation, uh, how do we approach learning and skill building, right? So let me do this thought experiment with you. Let's say if you had 6 hours to cut down a tree, how would you start? So let's say I've given you an axe, and I said that, okay, Mr. X, you have 6 hours and you have to cut down a tree. What would you do? So more often than not, you know, immediately in our brains, we would have this thought experiment where we would take the axe, and we would just start cutting down the tree with vigorous effort, right? We would put a lot of energy and effort into making sure we are cutting the tree as fast as possible. But and this is basically a quote by Abraham Lincoln, and it's been used multiple times in the corporate world, in the professional world, is that you give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. This, ladies and gentlemen, is how we should approach learning and skill building. Learning and skill building is not about an outcome that comes through immediately. It's not that if I've learned about something today, I'm going to apply it tomorrow. It never happens, right? In my investing journey today, there are concepts and there are things that I'm getting to apply today after 10 years of working professionally full time in a corporate setup. Maybe there was something that I learned during IPCC as to how do you really look at lease accounting? How do you really capitalize an intangible asset? And what are the implications of that when I am looking at a P&L or a balance sheet of a company, which has a large part of his asset base lying in intangibles, right? So the approach to learning and skill building is there is a tremendous amount of time and effort that can go into it, and you may not have any outcome from that. But what you're essentially doing is you're sharpening yourself for something that might be really, really beneficial for you going forward. It might just have a use case tomorrow or day after, or it may happen after 5 years. But when you're approaching learning and when you're approaching skill building, think of it as sharpening your axe, right? So that is basically three concepts that we spoke about. We spoke about what exactly is an edge and how we can mathematically define an edge as to. So we started with the example of a casino. How does a casino make money? It's because of edge. It's because there's something that they have which no one can beat, right? And that's how they continuously keep making money over a period of time. Then we talked about, okay, I mean, if we really think about sharpening our professional edge, it's like a sharpened pencil, right? With time it wounds out, but then the idea is how do you sharpen it again? And then finally we did this thought experiment about cutting down a tree. If we have been given 6 hours to cut down a tree, where do we allocate most of our time on? Do we start attacking the tree from minute one or from second one, or do we actually spend time in sharpening the axe, right? So that's the whole message behind how do you really build a professional edge. So let's start with what is a professional edge, right? And it's very important to know. I mean, okay, uh, we can talk about the fact that okay, we need to build an edge. This is the approach to skill building, but exactly how do we define professional edge? So before defining that, I thought it's a great thought experiment to build an internal checklist. The internal checklist can have a bunch of these 3 4 questions, right? And this is a very interesting thought experiment that all of us as professionals can do to really see where our edge is and to really see where is it that we can add value. So the first question to ask is, am I replaceable? Right? And it's a very bold and a no nonsense question that you can ask in whatever work that you're doing today. It could be you're a practicing chartered accountant, you have your own CA firm, you could be a working professional, you could be the CFO of a FMCG company, you could be a very senior tax resource in the tax department of a multinational corporation, or you could be someone who's just starting out his career, right? So the question is the most obvious question you can ask is, am I replaceable? And if there the answer is a resounding yes, then there are things to think about, right? And what do I mean by this? So there's a large part of work today because of technology. I mean, I'm not even talking about AI right now, but because of technology, there's a lot of automation that a lot of us don't know about. Uh, I have a, I mean, there's a line of work that I do for which I have to continuously talk to a lot of chartered accountants in a professional capacity. And even till date, I see a lot of these really professionally managed firms, really big firms, in fact, some of them even multinationals, rely a lot on manual processes. Whereas, let's say, some of the other firms, because I've worked in a global company and I've seen how global practices happen, they've been using automation, they've been using Excel macros for as long as I can remember, right? And what ends up happening is, and what I've seen, this is a very disturbing practice, is that people thrive on complexity. And what do I mean by this? It means that as long as I am able to demonstrate to the client that I'm adding some sort of value through some amount of complication, it just makes me think that I am valuable. But the reality is the way things are processing, the way things are progressing, this may not hold up in the new world. It's held up to a large extent in the old world because a people were ignorant, tech was expensive, access to automation was not easy. Today, you can go online, search how to build a chat GPT agent, and you yourself can build an agent for yourself that does all the work for you. Through a prompt, right? So the first question to ask is, am I replaceable? And if the answer to that is yes, then there are other things that you need to think about. What are the things that you need to think about? What is it that you're doing, right? uh, as I said, which part of the career chain are you currently operating in? Are you someone who's at entry level? Are you someone who's mid level? Or are you someone who's very senior? The second question that you need to ask is, am I doing the best in what I can do? It could be you've done M&A for the last 2 decades, right? It could be that you're just starting out in the M&A practice as an intern. Now, obviously, there'll be someone who's way ahead of you in the career curve. There'll be someone who has a lot of professional experience versus you. So, how is it that you can add value to that person, or how is it that you can really, you can really, uh, I would say, do some amount of disproportionate value addition? And what do I mean by this? See, you cannot compete with someone who has more experience than you on experience, right? It's like saying, I want to compete with Mukesh Ambani on wealth. There is no way you can do it. But what you can compete on is your hunger to do more, your curiosity chronicle that makes you think about new things. There are certain ways and processes in which things have been happening, and people are very used to that comfort nest. But is there a way you can disrupt that? Is there a way you can think of doing it better? Is there a way you can think of automating some of the things? I still remember back in ITC when I was interning in 2014. It's almost 11 years back. uh, there was some automation that I had built just out of my own interest, in an Excel sheet using macros. And it's not that I was an expert in Excel. It's just that I felt doing this task as a cut, copy, paste was not something which was a very, very value added work, right? Now, most people end up saying, oh, this work is not value added. Let's move on. Let's change our job or let's change our role. But I mean, the world doesn't work that way, right? In fact, uh, you can always take an effort, or you can always find some sort of energy to make sure you end up doing something that can create incremental value. Now, what has happened a few months back, I was meeting my ex boss again. He got transferred back to Calcutta. And I saw that Excel sheet that I had made. Obviously, there have been iterations on top of that, but that base Excel sheet still remains. And that just made me think and understand that, as an intern, maybe I didn't think I was adding value, but the fact that I was able to build something and it has stayed on for a decade goes to show that how far, if you even put an extra effort of 1 or 2%, can create massive outcomes going forward. Uh, and the final question that you need to ask in this checklist is that what are the industry expectations in which I am operating? So you could be working with, let's say, a KPO organization, right? Now, there you are supposed to only add value uh, based on what parameters you're given as an input on, which means you have to be more of a task completer rather than someone who can add value. So maybe the industry expectations there are low, or you could be someone who's working in a startup, right? And maybe along with finance, you also have to do HR, you also have to do admin work, you also have to do legal work. So the expectations there could be very, very high. So asking that question is also very important. Is the industry expectations where you're operating is high, or is it low? And this will give you a great perspective on where do you stand in terms of your existing professional edge, and where do you stand in terms of building your professional edge. uh, this is a very interesting chart made by this very famous author called James Clear, where he talks about the power of tiny gains. When you do 1% better every day, and if you compound this over a year, I mean, it's simple maths, right? So it's 1% every day compounded 365 times. The number is 37.78. Whereas if you do 1% worse every day, so 0.99 compounded 365 times actually goes to 0.003. So if you're improving 1% every day, after a year, you could be somewhere here. But if you're not improving 1% every day, in fact, you're declining 1% every day in terms of, let's say, your skill set or what is it that you want to do, after a year, you actually end up close to zero. So, when you're approaching professional edge, when you're approaching the fact that how do you build something that lasts, it's not that overnight you have to just become the new CEO. That's not going to happen. This is something that my father always told me, and it's something that I hold very, very close to me and very dear. Is that when you think about a professional career, it's like climbing a mountain. Okay, and it's been colloquially used, loosely used. There are various versions of this, but the message is very clear. Your professional career is like climbing a mountain. Now, there'll be some people who'll climb faster than you. There'll be some people who might fail after a year or two, and they'll give up, right? Because they'll be like, okay, this person has reached 2000 feet. I am still at 100 feet. But the real question is, there is a mountain that needs to be climbed, right? Some people can have access to better tools, some people can have a help with them, some people can have three sherpas with them, right? If you really think about climbing a mountain, I'm sure some of you attending this session would have climbed mountains, or are probably planning to do so. There's a different paradigm to each of these parameters, right? Uh, so different people take different paths. At the same time, different people have different outcomes. But what you should never forget is that climbing the mountain is important, because, see, climbing the mountain takes time. For some people, it can take 5 years. For some people, it can take 7 years. For some people, it can take 15 years. But you have to remember that your professional career is like a mountain. So it is gonna be tough. It is gonna be easy. But amongst everything else, it's gonna be a task in itself, right? So the answer doesn't lie in when do you reach the peak, but the answer lies in do you enjoy the journey while going to the peak. It's kind of like when we go out for a vacation, right? Let's say we are going to a hill station. We don't go to see, okay, this hill is at this altitude and this is the temperature. We go there to enjoy the view as we go up, right? Uh, so that is how you should think about uh, your professional career, and at the same time, how is it that you can build your edge in your professional career, right? So let's first start with the first part of this whole process, right, which is skill building. So as I said, when you look at skill building, you have to understand that life in general is a continuous learning process. So whether you are a professional, whether you are not a professional, life will continue throwing googlies at you, and every day in your life will be a new learning experience. So now, what I have also seen, in my limited time frame of uh, spending the last 12 plus years uh, in the professional world, is that I've come across a lot of people who seem to know it all, and they are great. They are technocrats. They could be a big expert in their fields, but I've never met someone who's never demonstrated, or let's put it this way, uh, I've never met someone shown that who's shown that they know it all and are successful at the same time. Which means, in fact, I've actually met a lot of people who are really, really successful, but they never for a second show that they know it all. And that is a great starting point for me to give you an example, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about building skills. In fact, one of the most veteran and the richest investors in this country, I had the privilege to meet him once, and it was almost a 2 hour meeting, right? The meeting was supposed to go on for an hour. It ended up going for 2 hours. Not even for a second, he showed that he knew it all. In fact, he was the one asking me questions about how do you think this industry is going to shape up? What is it that you see that I am not able to see? Which actually made me think, if this individual who has access to the best resources in the world, access to all the capital in the world, has nothing, is answerable for nothing, but he is on just one quest. And that quest was knowledge, and that quest was learning. And that gave me a uh, very impactful thought to think about, as to even life exactly is this. And even for a second, if you think you know it all, it's not going to end up well. There are enough examples in the entire world for you to prove home this point. At least in my world, which is the world of investing, I have seen this happen multiple times. People who claim they know it all, they'll come on TV, they'll say, oh, this stock is going to do this and that. I mean, there is a very high chance after a year or two, either there has been a SEBI order against them or their funds have not done well. So, being, 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 being not content with not knowing is also important, which means you should always strive to continue learning, and you should never have this. Idea in your mind that you know it all. Sure, you can have some amount of arrogance, which can come from experience, which can come from the fact that, okay, you spent a considerable amount of time doing research on these topics or doing research on these subjects. That gives you a good perspective on, or that will give you a good sense on, okay, I know this subject very well, or I am a big subject matter expert here. But at the same time, it's also important to stay grounded. And because this actually takes me to my third point, right? Uh, which is every professional in every field has its peaks and troughs, right? Let's think of cricket, for example, right? We've seen Saurav Ganguly, a cricket player all of us admire, and I'm sure all of us have grown up seeing him play. He was actually dropped from the Indian squad. What did he do? He didn't get depressed and be like, okay, my career is over. He actually started working hard, two times, three times. He started giving four times more effort into what he was doing to make a comeback, right? And he actually came back with great fitness parameters, and he actually ended up scoring a lot of runs after he made his comeback. to the point that he was also given captaincy back at one point. So he peaked at that point. And we've seen that happen with cricketers so many times. They make comebacks, they do well, and they go through troughs as well, right? So when they don't do well, uh, everyone goes against them, like your career is over. But what is very important is what that player does when things are not going his way, right? And we've seen this not just in sports, but it's also there in the professional world. So when we think of our profession, there'll be times when we'll have our peaks and we'll have our troughs. I know someone who does a lot of M&A work for startups. He had a ball of a time back in 2020, 2021, and after that for 2 years there was nothing happening. Right now suddenly again for 2 years, for the last 1 year, if you've seen the kind of IPO activity that's coming through, he actually made this very interesting pivot back in 22 23 to merchant banking and to investment banking. And he was very clear that, look, I think the startup M&A deals are kind of done to the kind of ticket sizes that he was advising on. I feel in the next 2 3 years they have to IPO, because what ends up happening, a lot of investors want an exit, and the only way to exit is A, if new investors are coming in, or B, if the company IPOs. So he knew that within the companies that he had given advice to, these companies will only IPO after 2 3 years, right? So he actually pivoted to IPO consulting, and the last 2 years he's having a great time professionally, right? Whereas had he continued with his existing practice, he would have not done that well. So, and I think it's a great example for you to also think of, based on whatever field that you're practicing on, or whatever area of work that you're really looking into, is that you will have your peaks and troughs, which means there'll be times when everything will go right, and there'll be times when everything will go wrong, right? So the question is, at peaks, when everything is going right, question everything about what can go wrong. Because at peak, when you have peak optimism, when you have peak positivity, you tend to think, you in fact never think about what can go wrong, right? And all I'm saying is, as much as you should be happy, and as much as you should be grateful that, oh, this has happened to me, or this is something that has developed for me, you should always think about what can go wrong, because that will get you prepared for the worst of the worst times. Because the worst of the worst times don't come announced, they always come unannounced. So at the back of your head, you should always remember one thing: what if this doesn't work out? What if things go wrong, right? And then the other part is troughs. So just like you have peaks, you also have troughs. So troughs is when you're going through a very, very bad time, when nothing is going your way, right? You thought that, okay, you build this practice, you're gonna do this, and suddenly a law change comes through, and your practice basically uh, goes toast, right? So at that point, when you start questioning, uh, what's gonna happen next, because as individuals, we have a lot of mental biases, which means if things are going wrong, we'll be anchored to that belief, oh, things will continue going on, right? It's a mix of anchoring bias and recency bias. But the real skill comes in really understanding that at troughs, start questioning or start imagining everything about what can go right, right? Because what will happen is, when things will change and when things will start getting better, uh, at that point you would probably miss the bus as to which bus you had to take. And this is exactly, if you really see how investing also works, right? uh, Almost since September or October, you will hardly find anyone talk about stocks anymore. Why? Because the markets have remained sideways. So people think the India growth story is over. But before that, for 2 years, even right from your watchman to your driver to your panwala, everyone was just talking stocks. No one was doing business. Everyone was doing FNO. Everyone was making 15% every month, and India was whatever. Um, so that was more on a lighter note. But the reality in life is, because we are anchored, because as human beings we have these mental biases, we are so much focused on what happened recently rather than zooming out and thinking big picture. And that approach, ladies and gentlemen, helps you a lot in making sure you're building the right skill sets. Because if you're not building the right skill sets, questioning these things, putting these ideas out, or having an open mind is not going to work. So if I think back, so let's say if I think about this friend of mine who pivoted from startup advisory to IPO consulting. Uh, the only reason he was able to do that is because he had an open mind. He's fairly successful. He advises companies that are fairly large, right? And I'm talking not even SME IPOs. I'm talking main board IPOs. Uh, he has no incentive to do this, right? But the fact that he thinks that no, my learning process should never stop, and because he was always keeping his eyes and ears open, and he had the mindset to continue learning, that's where he was able to hit this sweet spot, right, of ensuring uh, yeah he was able to hit this sweet spot of ensuring that he ends up taking up the right practice at the right time. And that can only happen if you have a continuous learning process. And that can also only happen if you don't think for a second that you know it all. So, so that is basically the long and short of how you should look at skill building, right? Now, let's look at a few examples as to how we can be ahead in the skill building journey, right? Because at the end of the day, professional edge or building your professional edge starts with skill building, right? So let's first think of step one. So let's focus on lighter things. We need to start with some form of reading. So let's say today you're at zero, you do nothing about building your own skills. You are someone who's actually probably caught up with work a lot. You are actually not being able to catch up on your own work. So I often hear people say, well, where do I have the time to build skill, or where do I have the time to do this? Because a lot of times people, and I've had this discussion with multiple of my chartered accountant friends who happen to be practicing CAs. So they said, we are so caught up with work, how do we do this? So then I always go back and tell them, identify what the root cause is, because it cannot be, and I'm not going to take this as an argument, that at this stage in your life you are doing all the job, which means, so if you're someone who's entry level, obviously you have to spend a lot of time in doing work. But if you have a learning mindset, you will figure out a way to take out time to learn, because no one else is going to come and tell you. You can attend enough webcasts, you can attend all the webinars in the world, but if you don't get started yourself, none of this is going to work. So the fact that you guys are here, the fact that we are all here talking about this, that's actually a great positive step for us to really build on this skill building journey together. So to start off, you can focus on lighter things. No one's telling you to catch hold of a novel, read it from picture to post. No. Let's start with some form of light reading. It could be something as basic as a Economic Times newspaper or a Mint newspaper, any business newspaper you pick up. It could be in the language of your liking. Maybe you like to read it in your local language. Maybe you like to read Hindi. Maybe you like to read English. I leave that to you as well. Maybe just focus on reading one article that you like, and it doesn't have to be the editorial section, it doesn't have to be the sports section, it doesn't have to be the IPO ad. In fact, it can be any one of them, right? Based on what is it that you're liking, and maybe just spend 5 minutes going through the newspaper. It could be you're just going through ads. It's okay. The idea is to help you get started, because today, because all of us are hooked to our mobile phones all the time, and we are so used to scrolling, uh, it's just that getting our focus back in this world has become very, very tough. You will see, maybe 5 years ago, if you could read a book with no effort, today reading that same book is going to take a lot of effort. And that is step one of knowing that you're not on the right path. In fact, I'm actually going to go back. This is what it means, right? You're losing your edge. You need to sharpen your edge back. As I said, having an edge is a continuous process. So you need to make sure that you stay sharp, right? And in today's world, because there are so many distractions all around, focus has become a skill, right? In fact, imagine 50 years back, focus was something all of us had, right? Because there were no distractions. So today we have everything, but we don't have focus, right? So how do you rebuild focus? You start with very light reading. And why do I say reading? I'm not saying podcast, I'm not saying YouTube, I'm not saying reels, I'm not even saying reading an article online, right? I'm just saying start reading a basic old newspaper. Because what will happen is, see, you can argue and say, oh, but I have a Kindle, or but I want to read a soft copy of a newspaper online. See, the problem is you can do all of those things, but at the end of the day, even that's going to distract you, right? Maybe you open a soft copy of a newspaper, you'll open a browser and be like, okay, what's happening in Facebook? Or okay, in Instagram, one of my friends has put a story. Or okay, in LinkedIn, let's see, I'm looking for a job change. Or okay, what's happening in my professional network? There's this constant urge to know what's happening, and that's sadly because of the new world that we all live in, right? And it's upon us to say no and be like, okay, this is not important today. What is more important is, how do I build my professional edge? I'm not saying you do it at the cost of your friends and family. They are as important in your life as your professional life is. And we'll cover some part of that in holistic growth. But for now, what is very, very important is, how do you get to the habit of reading? Or how do you start reading? Or how do you start building your professional edge? So, as I said, start with some form of reading. Why I say reading? It's a very high impact, low distraction activity. So, you can actually see this for yourself after you do this, maybe for a week or a month, maybe for a quarter, just to get started. You'll actually see you will tend to remember things more rather than if you did it in some other form. So I have no issues or no challenges with you listening to a podcast, watching an interview, etc. But my whole objective or my whole idea of saying all of this to you is, you need to start with reading, because you can build these things on top of reading, but reading is something you should not let go of, right? So how do you start reading? Well, you can start with anything that you like. As I said, it could be technical or it could be non-technical. What do I mean by this? So let's say you're someone who loves GST, right? You want to be stay updated with what's happening with indirect taxes. You can read the latest publications published by the institute. uh, some member who is practicing in this field has written a certain insight about a certain section. Read up on that. That's how you maintain your professional edge in what you're working on. Or it could be non-technical, right? Maybe you like coffee. Maybe you can read up on what's really happening in Brazil, what's a new coffee blend that's hit the market. It's just to get you into this process of going down a curiosity, or going down this small rabbit hole of chasing a certain element of curiosity, right? And once you start with that process, to make your thinking process better, or to make the idea of building your edge better, you can start using AI related tools, right? And we'll talk about two examples as to how you can think about using AI to your advantage when you're doing this skill building activity, right? uh, it could be about understanding things in your domain in vivid detail, and we'll cover that. But see, the whole point being, when you're talking about skill building has to start from you. And it could be, and there are multiple ways to think about it, right? So let's say if I am someone who looks into valuations, right? Now in my professional career, I mean, I have to deal with numbers all the time, right? Now there are a lot of companies that today do not make money, right? They don't make PAT, they don't make operating profit, but they are highly valuable. So then if we all assume that the markets are efficient, because that's what efficient market hypothesis has taught us, uh, what is it that is getting valued, right? What is the market valuing today, which may come after 3 years or which may come after 4 years? So while a traditional DCF will not give me that answer, I need to start tweaking my assumptions, right? I need to do something called a reverse DCF. Now I can do this because now I've been doing this now for a good part of 11 years. But someone who's just getting started, he might not even look at this idea and be like, oh no, but the DCF doesn't make sense. So, as I said, there'll be some moment of experiential learning, which we'll cover in the third section. And there'll also be some element of learning through new ways and new modes on how you go about things, right? Now, I'll take a short pause here to drink water. But Pragyaji, if there are any questions from the participants, we can take them uh, before we go further. Great. So I'm not able to see the chat. Uh, just gonna figure out how to do it. Yeah. Uh, Great. So, let's now delve into this using a few case studies, right? So, let's say you are doing your work on understanding about how, let's say, a jewelry store runs, or let's say you're a CA firm. So, we'll first start with, let's say, you're a CA firm, and what is it that you can do to make yourself be a little better in what you're doing? Or let's say you're a jewelry store uh, operator, or let's say you want to open a new jewelry store, right? So how can you use AI tools to make sure that to make sure that you're uh, to make sure that you're achieving the right way in which how things go, right? So let's start with the practicing CA form, right? How can you really use AI to make sure you understand what's happening, right? Uh, so if I'm a practicing CA firm, how can I make my edge, or how can I build the right skill set to make sure I know what I'm doing, and at the same time understand how the competition is doing, right? Because see, at the end of the day, we also have to see what the industry best practices are. So if I was running a CA firm and if I had to use AI to make sure I build my skill set the right way, this is the prompt I would give it, right? I would say scrape through all the CA firms in India, find out the top 10 in terms of Google reviews and ranking. So now, instead of me doing this, because we are now in an AI first world, right? Let's all first get used to this fact that we are all in an AI first world. So what we are going to do is we are going to say that, hey, go to Google, scrape through whatever CA firms are available, find out the top 10 CA firms in entire India in terms of Google reviews and ranking. So the AI tool is going to do that for me. ChatGPT is going to go online and do, so you can do a deep search and it'll do that. Then you can ask a question: what is it that people like, and what is it that people dislike about this firm? Okay, which means so after step one, it's going to give you a list that, hey, these are the 10 companies that do well, or these are the 20 companies that do well, and then you can then say that, okay, I want these companies, but okay, I don't want these companies, right? So let's say it tells you company A, B, C, D is there, but you can be like, no, but I don't want B, C, and D, I want E, F, G, H as well, right? That's the way it gets started. So that gives you a sense on, okay, these are the firms I want to benchmark my practice against, these are the firms I don't want, right? Then step two is can be, okay, what is it that people like and what is it that people dislike about this firm? Now this is only based on publicly available data. So maybe some people said, this firm did not file my returns on time. Some people said maybe, the professional behavior of this partner is very good. Or let's say someone will say the location of this office is fantastic. Um, you can park your car right next to the office. So there's ample parking available. Uh, then you can basically ask a third question: are these in line with global standards? So are the ratings, are the reviews, and what people are saying or talking about, are these in line with global standards? This is about maybe not just benchmarking your practice with your peers, but also benchmarking with, okay, globally what's happening, right? How are firms approaching their clients? What is it that people are doing? And then you can also ask, what is the segment that you want to cater to, right? So let's say today there are these big global capability centers coming up in India, which are called GCCs, which means that, let's say, a Boeing, which is a company based out of America, for them to do R&D work, for them to do servicing work, they'll have a India office that will service Boeing globally, not just in America, but globally. Why do they do this? Because it's a low cost way of operating. I mean, just like, let's say, while PwC would have a practice, this is just an example, which does CA related work, which does accounting, audit, and tax and assurance related work. At the same time, they also have something called PwC SDC, which is a service delivery center, where they work as a KPO or a BPO for global clients, right? So similarly, there's something called GCC, which is just nothing but a hashing of KPO and BPO together for some of these global companies, where they can also do R&D work and other work. How can I service the upcoming startup ecosystem? So maybe I've identified the startup ecosystem as my target customer, and I want to make sure that I'm servicing them the right way. How do I do it? Right. And then finally, MSME. So as a CA firm, maybe your focus is on GCC, right? But you want to get into servicing MSMEs. Maybe you are servicing a lot of startups like my friend was doing, but you want to do GCC work today. So these are some of the questions you can ask the prompt, right? You can ask ChatGPT and be like, okay, these are the things I want to do. This is one way of looking at these things, right? This is one example of how you can use ChatGPT to make sure you're building the right skill set for the practice that you're running. Now, this is something that I had done because I was doing research on a jewelry store, but I thought it's a great framework for all of us to see if tomorrow we want to start a jewelry store. What could we do, right? I was doing it to evaluate a company, but let's say today, if you want to start a new line of business, I'm giving you an example of a jewelry store. So let's say because I've spent a lot of time researching about consumer and researching about jewelry, so I've used this as an example. So what I would tell ChatGPT is, hey, you repeat the same exercise of scanning through Google reviews and benchmark it on various parameters. So first, what the AI tool is going to do, it's going to find out the 10, 15, 20, 50 best companies in India and give me a list that, okay, it could have Tanishq, Senko, Malabar, Lalita, GRT, based on, where you live. And then I tell ChatGPT that, you know what, you basically benchmark these stores on a few parameters by reading the Google reviews. So it could be store layout, it could be assortment, customer experience, design quality. Because see, if I'm opening a jewelry store, these are the 4 or 5 parameters that the customers are going to care about, right? Then I tell them that once you've done or you've taken these parameters out, you rank them and tell me what is it that customers really care about and what is it that they do not like, which means customers could care about the fact that, okay, the store has a great layout, there's a great assortment, but maybe they don't like something else, right? Maybe they like the design quality in a store, but they don't like the customer experience because the staff could be rude. Maybe the staff is great, but the layout of the store is weird, right? These are a few things in which I will know what exactly is happening and how exactly can I use this to my advantage, right? Um, that's one way of really looking at these things or using these tools to find out the opportunity in the right way, right? And then finally, you can actually tell ChatGPT that, hey, if I want to start a store today, what base metals should I focus on? Which means if you see the prices of gold and silver have been going one way. So now people are saying, okay, maybe we don't want to spend so much money on gold. Maybe let's do silver jewelry, right? Maybe let's do lab grown diamonds. That's a new trend that's ongoing. So ChatGPT is going to give me these answers, right? Uh, so yeah, I mean, just to basically sum up the whole skill building part, let's do a simple look back, right? There are two ways to build skills. In fact, just to conclude this part, now why am I saying now? What do you reckon when you do this? How much time is it gonna take? It's gonna hardly take you 45 minutes. Whereas if you were not using AI to your advantage, you would have to try and find a connect in every CA firm in this country. You would have to go and talk to them. You would have to find out a way that, okay, do I know these people? Right? Is there an in that I have? It would take a lot of time. Maybe doing the same exercise in a non-AI world could take you uh, it could take you maybe 5 days, it could take you maybe 2 months for all we know. uh, so that's something that we all need to understand, uh, is that how do we use these tools to our advantage to make sure we are hitting, uh, or we are using the time to our advantage, and be at the same time making sure we get what we want, right? uh, Similarly, for this jewelry store, and you will not believe I've actually done this exercise as a part of my research project. It took me 4 months to complete this, but because today I have Chat GPT, I can do that thing in 45 minutes. So clearly, there are a lot of things where doesn't matter whether you have to code, or doesn't matter whether you're tech savvy or not. Very basic things where you could actually look back and see, okay, these are things which are very obvious. These are things that are not worth it. These are things where I don't need my involvement in the first place, right? uh, you can actually use these frameworks to really figure out what is it that changes things for you, or what is it that creates an edge for you, right? So to conclude this part, right, ladies and gentlemen, there are two ways to build skills. Obviously, there are existing and new areas that you like. So this involves going through the subject matter. Maybe you are someone who's an expert in a certain field, so you go deeper into that field and become the subject matter expert there. You can consume content through multiple avenues. I would generally prefer you start with reading, because that's, as I said, it's a very high impact, low distraction form of consuming content. You can work your way up to maybe a podcast, you can work your way up maybe to a YouTube interview. There are ways to do it, right? And based on your comfort level, you can do whatever it is that you want to do, right? And then there are other ways to do it, right? So uh, there's competitive benchmarking. So in competitive benchmarking, you can do what are you doing versus what your peers are doing. What is it that your industry is doing versus what is best in the industry, right? So to cover that, we talked about the fact that when you're doing a benchmarking of CA firms, let's say if you're someone who has a practicing CA firm, you benchmark yourself with other firms in the country which are maybe doing similar practice, similar line of work, etc. Or at the same time, you spend time to see, okay, what is happening globally. Globally, certain standards met, etc. uh, so coming back, competitive benchmarking also goes a long way in understanding what exactly is happening, right? uh, and then the final question which all of us should actually be asking ourselves is, see, edge is not built on itself. To build an edge, you need time. And if you don't have an edge in the modern day world, don't expect outsized outcomes. It is perfectly okay for you to also say, hey, you know what, Sakit, all of this sounds great, but frankly speaking, I don't need to do it. Or I am already very content and happy in what I'm doing. That's also an approach that you can take. But the way things are moving, if let's say you're not already there where you want to be in life, you need to build an edge and you need to continuously maintain your edge. Because if you don't do it, someone else is going to do it, and he's basically going to eat your lunch. The world today has changed. And I'm not saying all of this to fear you, or make you fear these things, but I'm telling you ways how you can embrace it the right way. That is very, very important, right? So, as I said, focus with sharpening your edge and then keep using it to start the process all over again. Because as we saw, the process of building an edge, or the way to build an edge, is not about making sure you've sharpened the pencil once, but you have to continuously sharpening your pencil again and again. Because the more you use your pencil, the edge will go. So you need to continuously keep maintaining your edge. That, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of skill building, right? And now we'll get to the part of knowledge sharing. This is the second part of building a professional edge. So when we talk about knowledge sharing, right? Why do we do knowledge sharing, or what is it that we are trying to achieve by sharing knowledge? So in order for us, or in order for me to tell you about what exactly is knowledge sharing, let's first understand a concept of zero sum game and a concept of positive sum game, right? On the screen, you can see a picture where, if you see, there are two pies. Okay, there's a small apple pie which, as you can see, everyone's rushing to eat, and then there's a massive big pie. Okay, and no one's there. The world today, as we see it, ladies and gentlemen, is increasingly seeing themselves go towards a zero sum game. And what does that mean? Zero sum game means if I win, you lose. If you win, I lose. That's a zero sum game. And that's how, we all our lives we've been told how games need to be played, which means there's always a winner and there's always a loser. But of lately, if you would see, there's also this concept of a positive sum game. In fact, there's also something called a negative sum game. So I haven't covered that. But the idea is, what exactly is a positive sum game? And I'm going to give you a very, very, very simple and a relevant example. Most of us think of stock markets, or that's what the general perception is. I still am yet to change these comments for myself. All of us know, okay, growth story, investing, all of that. But inherently, or because of history, because of a lot of reasons, we've all been told that stock market is a place where you gamble and you lose money, right? Stock market is a gambling den. But the reality is, you only lose money when you trade, right? Which means you buy a stock, you think this stock will go up, it doesn't go up, it goes down. You end up putting more money, and then the stock keeps going down, and you lose money, right? And there are enough examples for us to see how retail investors lost money. And then they'll complain, oh, stock markets are bad. What was SEBI doing? But the reality is they acted on greed, right? And when they should have been rational, they were acting out of fear, right? So it was the decision was more emotional than being uh, rational, right? So let's understand what's exactly happening, right? When we talk about zero sum game, or when we talk about trading, if I make money, you lose money. So let's assume in the markets there are just two people, you and I. If I make money, you lose money. If you make money, I'll lose money, right? That's how zero sum game works. But let's now change the lens from trading to investing, and let's talk about how investing is a positive sum game. Which means, so let's think of a stock, right? So let's say there's a stock called Zomato. All of us know it, all of us use it, our kids use it, right? My kid is too small right now to use it, but I'm sure at with due course he's also going to use it. uh, so Zomato at one point was trading at 60 rupees a share. So let's say, you know uh, Pragya ji bought this stock at 60 rupees. Okay, she thought there was immense value in this stock, and at some point she realized the stock has gone to 120 rupees. I have made 60 rupees in this stock. I will sell this stock. She sold the stock at 120. I was someone who was doing my research because I was doing some other work at 120 rupees, and I thought this stock is actually worth 250 rupees. I bought this stock from Pragya ji at 120 rupees. And then what happened? Stock went to 250, right? Now at 250, suddenly a global fund realized, well, uh, in China, Meituan did this. In America, DoorDash did this. In the UAE, Talabat is doing this. So Zomato is gonna do this 5 times over. Maybe the stock is worth 5,000 rupees, or maybe the stock is worth 600 rupees. And at 250, I was like, there's a lot of competition coming up in India. Uh, Maybe the path to profitability of Zomato is delayed. I have made my money. I want to get out, right? So I sold the stock at 250. Now think about this, right? We've all bought and sold stocks at different price points, and all of us have made money. That is how positive sum game work. Pragya ji saw that there was an opportunity at 60 rupees. She bought it. She sold it to me at 120. She made 60 rupees. I bought it at 120. I sold it at 250 rupees. I made 130 rupees. Someone bought it at 250. Today the stock is at 350. He is 100 rupees in the money. But that doesn't change the fact that uh, because there are different price points at which different people have operated, no one has lost money till now, right? Now, obviously, you can argue the opposite can also happen. Price can fall, this and that, etc. But the world doesn't work that way, right? The world works, or that is also an example. But to drive home the point of what a positive sum game is, positive sum game focuses on increasing the pie. It doesn't focus on fighting for a smaller pie. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what the concept of a zero sum and a positive sum game is, right? And basically, trading, investing, life, lessons, everything boils down to positive sum games, right? So coming to why share knowledge, all right, or what exactly is the purpose of sharing knowledge? You see, when you share knowledge today, and there basically in today's world, knowledge sharing happens through two ways. One is through your peer network. So you will gonna, you know, share stuff with your friends. You're gonna share stuff with your colleagues. That's how knowledge sharing happens with your peer network. And you can also do it publicly, right? So publicly, you put publications out, you put stuff on social media. That's one way of sharing knowledge as well, right? Uh, so how do you do it? I mean, today, let's say you are someone who's an expert in direct taxes, right? You know how to optimize taxes. You've got a great grip on old regime versus new regime, etc. A good place for you to be discovered today is to maybe start publishing about it, right? You can publish it through CA Institute's journals. You can just talk about basic life hacks that, hey, ATC is gone, this is there. In the new regime, if you do this, this is going to be more beneficial for you. You can just give small value addition tips, or let's say something that if someone who knows nothing about tax reads, and he's probably like, okay, this is something I did not know, this person has added disproportionate value in my life, maybe I should reach out to him, maybe I should hire him professionally to manage my taxes, right? Because see, the power of the internet today is the internet is the mouthpiece for you, which means you don't have to go and talk about this continuously with your clients, with your friends, with your colleagues. The internet does that for you. What you need to do is to stay consistent. What you need to do is to make sure you're building your professional edge the right way, right? And that is very, very important. That how do you build your professional edge? So, um, so that is very, very important, right? Building your professional edge, sharing knowledge, and that can lead to various outcomes, right? Maybe you just share it because you like sharing it. Maybe you don't expect anything to happen in return, but you will be surprised on the positive side. If you do it consistently and if you do it long enough, you're going to do things and you're going to build things that you never thought was possible. In fact, once you start sharing things on the internet, and it's okay, you can be comfortable with a certain form. Maybe you like writing, so you can use text. Maybe you like video, so you can make videos. Maybe you're shy. There's a platform for everything. Maybe you don't like writing, maybe you don't have the talent today to build videos. You can record an audio, you can record a podcast, put it on Spotify. There are multiple ways today to do it. It's just that you need to figure out what is it that's working for you, and you need to double down on that. And at the same time, you need not have expectations. What you need to focus on is staying consistent. If you're publicly putting content, or if you're publicly starting to share your knowledge, and it has to happen in a structured way. You focus on a delivery timeline and you stick to it, which means maybe you're comfortable publishing one article a month. Maybe you're comfortable publishing one article a quarter. Maybe you're comfortable publishing one article a year. But once you start doing that, stay consistent. Maybe in the next 2 years, you only publish two articles, but make sure you publish that, right? Because a lot of us have this fear of public failure. In fact, there was this study done when people ranked the kind of failures that people really feel very, very strongly about. The answer was the fear of failing in public is actually much higher. In fact, it's actually the fear of public speaking is much higher than fear of death. So it's actually a reality. And if you really think about it, it's nothing, right? It's just how human perception works. So once you kind of get that removed, or get it out of your way, there is a way to look at life from a positive sum lens and not from a zero sum lens, right? So that's about posting publicly. And as I said, knowledge sharing can happen through your peer network, which is your friends, colleagues, etc. Or you can do it publicly, right? You can do online, you can do offline. There are multiple ways to do it, right? And then when you look at life, you need to look at life as a positive sum game. It's not a zero sum game, right? As I said, a lot of people also have this perception that, hey, If I'm going to share this knowledge out, or if I'm going to tell this to people, my value is going to go down. Again, as I said, if you go back to the checklist of building a professional edge, the first question was, am I replaceable? And if the answer to that is yes, you need to do a hard relook at how you're operating. And as I said a few moments earlier, if you're okay with how things are going and if you're happy with where you are at, then you don't need to do all of this. But the objective of doing all of this, step one, is to look within and to be like, okay, is this something I'm doing for myself first? Because if you yourself are not happy, the other outcomes are not going to happen ever. Because the objective has to be that, okay, I'm doing this to ensure my professional edge gets better, I become a better professional. At the same time, I am able to add value to myself. Because if you're not adding value to yourself, you can't add value to others. Excuse me. As I said, world today has a good mix of positive sum and zero sum people. When you look around, there'll be a lot of people who think zero sum, which is, this is going to happen at the cost of this. And there are a lot of people who think positive sum, right? Where they say that, hey, if I share something about taxation today, maybe someone who knows about this field better is going to come to me and say, you know what, Saket, this was wrong. This is the way you should look about it. And again, I need to have the humility to accept that despite doing everything, despite knowing everything, I may not know things or I may not accept things, right? And people will always avoid, my suggestion is always avoid these kind of people. People who think zero sum. Always be with people who think positive sum. As I said, the more you start sharing knowledge, the more you will start realizing that there is more to learn, right? Because the learning process never stops. There is never an end to how you learn and what you do. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to tell you about how knowledge sharing really works, right? Uh, so until now, we've covered a fair bit of skill building, how we can go about skill building. We've looked at a few concepts. We've talked about knowledge sharing. How is it that we should share knowledge or we can share knowledge? And what can knowledge share lead to? What are the outcomes that we are playing for? Now we come to the third section, right? The third section is about learning through experience. And if you really think about it, as chartered accountants, as professionals who've cracked one of the toughest courses in finance in India and probably in the world, because if it's tough in India, it's tough in the world. If you really see right from the start of our curriculum, right, the curriculum is actually designed for us to do practical thinking, whether it's articleship, whether it's OT, GMCS. Right now, formats have changed. And then, the institute also has these webcasts where today all of us are sharing knowledge with each other. But let's think from first principles, right? Let's see what's really at play. First is, okay, how can I be a better car driver, right? You know what the answer to this is. How can you learn to swim? Or how is it that you can be a better swimmer? How can you be a better speaker? How can you be a better learner, right? How can you be a better professional? If you really see, the answer to all of this lies in one thing. The answer lies in doing. Most of us as professionals or most of us as individuals are always obsessed about the fact that we'll do a perfect launch. We'll build a perfect plane, right? We'll be like, if we do it, it has to be better than Picasso. Otherwise, we'll never paint. But see, the reality is if you start painting tomorrow, and let's say, even if you paint all your life till the time you turn 90, there is a high chance you will still not be Picasso, right? So you will not be the best in what you do. But you need to start doing. You need to start building the plane as you fly rather than obsessing about the fact that I want to build the plane right. That doesn't happen. In fact, I think it's just a way for you to remain lazy and not do things the right way, right? Most of the times we are too obsessed with getting the plane built right, but the reality is the answer in life is to keep doing things. And we're going to use a few case studies as to how some amount of critical thinking can go a long way when we look at a few case studies, and we'll actually introduce another concept before we get into case studies, right? So learning through experience is important. because experience teaches you both things. It teaches you good things, it teaches you bad things. You will see there are some things that you really start appreciating a lot because you have been able to experience that. Or there are some things that you will be like, okay, this is not something that works for me, or this is something that works for me really, really well. Um, so experience teaches you a lot, while learning things by the book, understanding what's really at play, all of that is fine. But at the same time, there could be some things that you only learn through experience. As I said, you can read all the books that are there, uh, which tell you how can you be a better driver or how can you learn to swim. But the only way you can learn driving or you can really learn how to swim is by actually doing it. And that also, ladies and gentlemen, applies to our professional careers. We need to continuously experience things to understand what's working, what's not working. As I said, if my friend, again going back to that example, would not have taken that plunge where he wanted to change his practice overnight, he would not have been able to take advantage of what's happening in the last 2 years, right? If yesterday I looked at a few jewelry companies and today, let's say, I'm in the time and space where I can open a jewelry store, I exactly know what I need to do. But at the same time, there could be a high possibility that I'm not successful. And it's okay to live with that outcome. But if I don't try and if I don't achieve what I want to, there's no way of knowing that, right? So then the question also is in what am I doing to try, right? And that's very, very important. So let's try and introduce you to a new concept, right? And the concept is something called variant perception, right? This is actually something that was introduced by this gentleman called Michael Steinhardt. But first, let me define to you what variant perception is. Variant perception is a form or version of something that differs in some respect from other forms of the same thing or from a standard. The way in which something is regarded, understood, or interpreted. Now, this must have sounded to you like a whole lot of words, but let's take this understanding through an example, right? So, most of us today spend money, right? We spend money on UPI. I don't think we use cash anymore in this world. Um, Now, someone comes to you and says that, well, there is a, uh, there is a, there is something called, uh, there is something called a credit card, right? If you spend money on your credit card, you get reward points. Uh, Now, when you get reward points, using that points, you can get flights, you can book a hotel, whatever. There are multiple ways to do these things. Uh, Now, what that ends up putting you in a loop is sometimes you might end up doing spends which are not required. Why? Because you're chasing a metric, you're chasing a hotel redemption, you're chasing a flight ticket, you're chasing a free gift. So if you put a variant perception to this, right, and if you really think first principles, maybe you don't need a credit card in the first place, because in any case you have to pay the money back. And because when you have plastic money in your hand and someone tells you, hey, here's a card and you can spend 5 lakh rupees in this and pay me back after like 2 months, there is a high chance at some point you're going to use it, right? Even if you don't want to use it, no matter how disciplined you are, it's designed to make you spend money, right? So variant perception can be like, oh, but I don't need this card in the first place, right? Now let's break down the variant perception into multiple parameters, and it's important for us to think about these things professionally. We'll use case studies of three companies to drive home the point, but it's not very different when we look at our own professional lives, right? So variant perception actually has five elements, and it's actually more of an investing concept. But if you really see building a professional edge, whether it's goals in your life, it's not very different, right? It's actually kind of the same. Uh, so let's look at this, right? What exactly is at play? So first is there's a non-consensus view, right? What exactly is a non-consensus view? The core of variant perception is a viewpoint that is meaningfully different from the prevailing market expectations, which means, okay, so say for example, you could be someone, as I told you, like if we use the credit card example, uh, everyone says, okay, get a credit card, get reward points, get rewarded. But the variant perception could be, hey, but I don't need a credit card in the first place, right? So it's meaningfully different from what the market expects. Uh, as I said, if you look at it from an investing lens, everyone, while the market might feel okay, you know, certain pockets of markets are overvalued, money is not to be made. But variant perception is, well, I think this is the time to buy, right? That's how you form a non consensus view. But building that non consensus view has to be well founded. What does that mean? This well founded view actually comes through high conviction, and it comes through being intellectually advantaged. So, this different view isn't a guess, it's supported by thorough research, analysis, and a deep understanding of the situation, right? It's intellectually advantaged, it requires more accurate information processing and a better understanding of the market that others possess. At the same time, it has high conviction. Investors must have a high degree of confidence in their variant perception to act on it. Now, when you look at the world of investing, right? Or when you look at the world of how we look at certain things in life in general, we need to have a very well founded view, right? Um, and this view basically has to be something that um, comes from a position of awareness. It doesn't come as it is, right? So, as I going back again to this example of my friend who pivoted from consulting to IPO, from M&A to IPO consulting, he was a little intellectually advantaged. So he obviously knew certain things were in play. He had his eyes and ears open, right? It was well founded, right? So he was acting from a position of awareness. And he had very high conviction that it's going to play out in the next 2 to 3 years. So when you actually put these three, four things together, that's how you get a potential for alpha. What is the meaning of alpha? Alpha means outperformance, right? In fact, the newsletter that I also write is called Beta to Alpha. You would have seen this logo across all slides. Beta is volatility. So markets go up and down. That is beta, and that's basically how this is, right? Markets are volatile, and then you have alpha. So outperformance is called alpha when you can sort of write this volatility out. Hence the word beta to alpha. So going back to variant perception, when you look at potential for alpha, potential for alpha is basically when this non-consensus view proves to be accurate. So the fact that my friend's pivot worked out, that's how he made his alpha. Maybe it would not have worked out. So that's also an outcome you need to live with. It can lead to significant profits as the market eventually reprices the asset to reflect the correct perspective. Now, if you see, most people think that, okay, uh, real estate cycle is done or real estate is not going to make money. But there are pockets of opportunity everywhere. Just see the kind of infrastructure development happening in multiple cities, whether it's Bombay, whether now there's suddenly Vizag on the map. Now, suddenly you'll see real estate prices here might get some sort of appreciation, right? So eventually you'll see the prices of real estate will eventually catch up to where the state is, right? That's basically how variant perception works. Now let's look at it from a few case studies, right? And I've cherry picked three companies before we come to the last part of the presentation. So today, if we talk about a few companies that have done really well, and this is again a variant perception. Why am I talking about these companies? Because these companies had everything going against them, and yet they used certain things to their advantage the right way, right? They actually had things going against them, and they used things to their advantage. So let's start with this company called Saregama. This company used to be known as HMV. In fact, um, at one point, I think India's first, in fact, the national anthem that was sung by Rabindranath Tagore was recorded by HMV. So they actually recorded the first recorded song in India. Company has a rich legacy, goes back 100, years, has a lot of catalog of artists, you name it, Rafi, R.D. Burman, etc. All the old classics, as well as getting very relevant in today's world. So a lot of new movies by, let's say, Karan Johar and a lot of that, they get the music rights to these songs. So now, this was a company that was always selling cassettes and CDs, right? And if you see what has happened in the music industry, Music industry for the longest time never made money. Films made money, producers made money, box office made money, but the music labels didn't make money. Why? Because the industry was rampant with piracy. We all have grown up in an age where if we had to listen to a song, we would go on a particular website, download it, send songs to each other via Bluetooth, or go to a local shop and give them our phone and give him 200 rupees and be like, please load all songs that you have. Right? That's the era we grew in. Today, if we have to listen to a song, we can't do any of these things. We either have to go on Spotify, we either have to go on YouTube, we either have to go on Apple Music, JioSaavn, Ghana. That's it. That's where the buck starts and that's where the buck ends. 4 years ago, we had six more apps. Today, we just have these five apps. So the industry went through massive consolidation. In fact, people thought Saregama is a company that sells these boxes, right? A lot of people still think Saregama makes money by selling these boxes. But these boxes hardly contribute 0.5% to their PAT. In fact, their contribution to Saregama's PAT is zero. Okay. But this was a great money spinner for them back in 2020, 2021 when the company was reinventing itself. And then this whole tech disruption came and Spotify came to light, right? Now, imagine Spotify coming and disrupting the industry and killing all the middlemen. Actually was a big savior for the industry because the industry could now really use things to their advantage, which means uh, the fact that Spotify made listening to music very accessible, and uh, they could make listening to music very easy. People started using Spotify to their advantage, right? uh, just a moment. So people started using this to their own advantage, right? That's how they were doing things. If we look at a company like Zomato, for example, right? Zomato at one point was just a restaurant scanner for the world, restaurant menu scanner for the world. Um, and no one thought at that point that this would be something that would get into food delivery. This would be something that would do quick commerce. And today, if we really see, Blinkit drives more than half of value for Zomato, right? Uh, there's this company called Goldium International, which 2 3 years ago, excuse me, was India's largest exporter of natural diamonds. As you see, the industry today has pivoted from natural diamonds to lab grown diamonds, right? And what has ended up happening is that the fact that it's pivoted from natural diamond to lab grown diamonds, they've actually used that to their advantage, right? They've actually started exporting lab grown diamonds, and they are also opening retail stores, right? Because they see this is a big opportunity that they can capitalize on, right? Uh, Now, what I'm trying to tell you here, ladies and gentlemen, is that these three companies had everything going against them, right? And they actually used variant perception to their advantage to capitalize on that opportunity. So, at one point, when Goldium was hardly doing lab grown diamond sales, uh, or they were selling, I think their total sales for the year was 700 800 crores of natural diamond. Today, they are selling 700 crores of lab grown diamonds in less than 3 years. So, their pivot to doing this was extraordinarily different. And they had the variant perception that, well, if something is disrupting us, let's just participate in this, right? So was the case with Saregama, where, okay, Spotify made life easier for them. But because Spotify came, because they owned the IP to all their songs, they were able to monetize that very well rather than trying to monetize it from left, right, or center. Now, if you look at Zomato, at one point they were scanning restaurant menus for the world. Now they've got into food delivery and now they've got into quick commerce, right? So things have worked to their advantage, right? Now, the reason why I'm talking about all of these case studies is it's a great framework for you to think about your industry. It's a great framework for you to think about your practice. It's a great framework for you to see if things are not going your way, what is it that you can do to make things go your way, right? And it's not necessary that if you started doing something in a certain way, you have to continue doing that in that way, right? uh, it's not the end of the world, right? It's not how you should be doing these things all the time, because times keep changing, things keep changing, and it's very, very important for us to stay the course, right? So as I said, now let's look around. There are enough working professionals in this world today that basically have pivoted into non-core areas. So you'll find maybe there are a lot of chartered accountants who maybe don't do professional practice of assurance or audit. They are running a strategy piece somewhere. They are probably working in a hedge fund, right? Um, so there are enough case studies around you where people pivoted into non-core areas. They started doing something and then they pivoted. Globally, there's something called a PayPal mafia, which these are basically employees that used to work at PayPal, and now they've gone ahead and made let's say a company of their own and did something else. So they are called the PayPal mafia, right? But today in India we have something called a Flipkart mafia, right? We have something called a Paytm mafia, which were, let's say, employees that used to work in Flipkart. They've gone further and they've made new companies. There's Paytm mafia, people who used to work in Paytm today are running new companies, right? They built new companies and they've become unicorns, and that's basically how employees today are, right? And these are not entrepreneurs. These were people who were working in these companies who went on to build new companies or went on to work in newer companies because they saw an opportunity somewhere else. Why? Because they could see a problem. Now, I'll give you an example. Uh, a very close friend's brother of mine, he used to work in Flipkart. Now, when he was working in Flipkart, he's a IIT pass out. What they realized was in Flipkart, there is this big challenge of tagging pictures, right? Which means if you go and select, okay, I want a shoe which is a size 9 and a blue color, someone manually tags that. When the pictures are clicked, to click blue and to click size 9, someone tags that manually. And it was a big cost to the company. I think they were probably paying 8, 9 rupees per image, right? It was a massive cost. And knowing Flipkart what it is, it operates at a scale where it has crores of products in its catalog. So it was costing the company a lot of money. What these guys did was they built this app where people like you and I could open the app, see these pictures, and tag ourselves. And we would get rewarded 1.5, 2 rupees per image if we did it right. Now imagine breaking down that cost by 95, 100% by building an app. Now, this is, if you really think about it from a business perspective, they realize, okay, this is a cost center for the business. How do we make it into a revenue center? And they built a business around it, right? Ladies and gentlemen, it could be anywhere around in your company or in your practice also. Maybe you could be paying a lot of cost for something. Maybe you could see that, okay, this is a pain point for the company, and you can figure out a way how to optimize it or how you can make it better, right? Or how you can make sure that these things work your way in the right format, right? Uh, so, so if we see what the framework was in all of this, working professionals identified something that was a very big problem, and they figured out an easy way to solve it. With time, you can be at the right place in the right time and understand what works and what does not, right? Now, again, how does that happen? It's a combination of positive thinking, non-consensus view, variant perception, and having the edge that will help you take these decisions from a position of strength. So, if you don't have the edge, you will not have a position of strength. If you don't have a position of strength, you can't think from a variant perception, right? Or you can't have your variant perception, which can be a non consensus view. And the thing with non consensus view or the thing with variant perception is a lot of people think it's absurd or they will not like how these things shape up, right? Uh, so that's how you look at these case studies, right? uh, Again, I mean, if I do a quick look back into my own career, I started in audit in my articleship. During that period, I realized, okay, this is not something that excites me a lot, right? I don't see myself becoming a partner in a CA firm at some point of time and head this practice. This was a revelation I had very early in life. Tax was something that never interested me. I ended up working in ITC. I was a part of the strategic planning team as a part of an industrial trainee. And then I also headed treasury for the hotels division, right? These are roles that I fairly enjoyed doing. Then I moved to a global setup in Philip Morris International, which is the global licensor for Marlboro cigarettes. And at that point, when COVID had hit, equities was something I was always interested in because, ITC was something where in the first year I had spent a lot of time reading the balance sheet, doing competitive benchmarking, etc. So those things were always there in the works. And as we speak today, I work as a fund manager. I fairly enjoy doing what I'm doing. And it's not that I did not enjoy doing the things earlier. But see, if you really think about it, this is the most non consensus path that you can think of. But there was one very, very important thing that was fairly uh, widespread across this. I was committed to my interest. What was my interest? How do I read a balance sheet better? What is it that people are not looking at, right? How do I make it work, right? How can I automate it? How can I make sure that I'm seeing things the right way or I'm seeing the right things? Uh, so that basically is how you make sure you're building your edge the right way, you're building on your skill sets, you're sharing knowledge, and then how you think from a variant perception point of view. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the last section of our presentation, and this is something which is very, very important. We live in a day and world today where we are constantly bombarded with the need of validation. We'll go on Facebook for likes. We would want to make that reel. We would want to make that post that goes viral. It's just something that is ingrained in our heads today. And this, I think, is a fundamentally a big problem in how we think, right? Actually, the bigger problem is we do not know that this is a problem, right? That's step one. So dopamine hits are something we need to really figure out what to do or what not to do about, right? And what exactly is dopamine? It's something called a feel good hormone, right? It's just that because we are now constantly bombarded with a screen with notifications, this has become our source of dopamine. Which is why a lot of people keep saying they are not happy anymore. Why is it that people say today in this world people are more unhappy despite having all the resources that they want? Or 50 years ago, no one had access to even 1% of these resources, the kind of resources people have access to today, right? So, this is actually how you define dopamine, right? And it's very, very important when you think of yourself to see how holistic living works. There's cheap dopamine, right? So, you have series, alcohol, junk food, gambling, social media, drugs, right? This gives you a high, or at some point you get some level of fulfillment. That's basically what cheap dopamine is. Then there's real dopamine. You have new experiences, you have sun and outdoors, you need to work on your goals, you have good sleep, rest, exercise. This is what real dopamine looks like, right? In fact, what I would urge all of you is focus on the right side of this image more, but do see what the left side of the image are. The problem is today we spend a lot of time on the left side, which is why the right side gets compromised. And that's what real dopamine looks like, right? Uh, Again, as I said, the concept of holistic growth encompasses a lot of things. We need to make sure we are cognizant of the time that we are spending on social media because, see, whether we like it or not. In fact, you know what? You can do this thought experiment today. Uh, Go back, look at your mobile screens, and see how much time you spent in your favorite social media app. You'll get an answer. You need to ensure that you're eating well, right? You need to read also non-related topics. So let's say you're an expert on tax and indirect tax and GST. Doesn't mean you have to continue doing that, right? You can read on maybe what's happening in the world. Maybe you can just take some interest in figuring out what exactly is Trump trying to do, or maybe why gold prices are going up. These are just obvious rabbit holes that you can go down. Or you can be someone who's more interested in sports. So it's okay. You can see how is a yo-yo test built? Why is it? fit players are dropped from a squad and new players are put. Uh, right, what is it that the selectors are seeing? So I'm saying you can read up on topics which are not related to your co-field, and then see, nothing in this world is worth anything if you're not healthy, right? So as much as wealth is important, because see, we are all in a constant race to make sure we are making something of this life, which could be wealth, which could be making money, which could be being more successful. But all of this cannot come at the cost of compromising our health. So we need to make sure we stay fit. um, Fitness can does not mean spending 5 hours in the gym. It could be a sport that we like. And today there's enough access and opportunity available for us to do these things, right? So a combination of all of this is going to help, and a combination of making sure that you're cognizant of what you're eating. See, all of us tend to also stay away from home a lot of times, so we end up ordering food. Be cognizant of what you're ordering. uh, do not overdo things. Do things in moderation. Again, I'm not saying do not do things at all. Pick up a sport that you like. That's a great way to start your journey on fitness. If at all you're not doing fitness, if you're doing, it's fantastic, right? It's amazing. And be cognizant about the time that you spend on social media, right? uh, these are a few things which are important when we talk about holistic growth, right? So, to quickly sum it up, I think we've covered a lot today in terms of making sure we are building the right skills, we are sharing knowledge, and we are focusing on holistic growth, right? What did we do? Okay, how do I find the right career path? What am I learning through experience? How am I broadening my horizon of personal well being? We've seen a few companies, we've seen a few examples, we've discussed how Edge looks like, right? Just doing a quick run through as we come to the end of the presentation, right? We talked about building skills by appreciating the fact that life is a continuous learning process. We took examples of two case studies, one of a CA firm and one of a jewelry store, as to how you can analyze what's working. We talked about a very important concept of what a zero sum game is and what a positive sum game is. And ultimately, learning through experience is what matters. And what matters even more is what variant perception is, right? Uh, we looked at a few case studies, right? Uh, uh, and then finally, the concept of dopamine hits, right? Dopamine is a feel good hormone. And that basically defines how we feel. So if we are constantly bombarding ourselves with likes, junk food, etc., our tolerance for getting dopamine hits becomes very, very low, which is why when we actually end up doing real activities that are supposed to make us feel good, we don't feel good. It's actually a very scientific way why we are, let's say, naturally not happy about things, right? That's the difference between cheap dopamine and real dopamine. Again, to conclude the presentation, nothing in this life is from a single dimension. Everything is multidimensional. So looking at holistic growth is equally important. Be cognizant about the time you spend on social media. Eat well. Uh, Pick up a fitness activity, pick up a sport, and also spend time on reading things which are not related to your line of work. So that will just help you develop an edge or help you see things beyond the obvious, right? So you read on non-related topics, you eat well, you spend time on social media, but be cognizant of the kind of time you spend on social media. And finally, at the end of the day, fitness goes a long way in making sure your long term wealth, which is your health, is protected. So I'll just conclude the presentation by this quote by Nawal Ravikant. He makes this quote and he says that a healthy person wants a lot of things, but a sick person wants only one thing, and that is to get fit. So most of us don't think of health till the time it comes to a level where we have to think this way, which is why building that into our day-to-day life is very, very important. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You've been a great audience. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Pragya ji, you can help us do that.
Yes, sir. Let me check the chat box first. So there's no question I can see over here in your chat box. So we can conclude this Yes. No chat, sir. No question. I think yes. So let me conclude this by saying thanks to Saket ji. And it has been such an honor to be part of this wonderful webcast on sharpening your professional edge, skill building, knowledge sharing, and holistic growth for chartered accountants. Organized by Professional Skill Enrichment Committee ICI. On behalf of the Professional Skill Enrichment Committee ICI, we would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to our today's speaker Saket ji for his enlightening session. A wide round of applause and thanks to the organizer, Professional Skill Enrichment Committee (ICI), and our today's speaker Saket ji and other stakeholders made the webcast a memorable one. Finally, we would like to thanks all of you present here and helping us make this webcast a grand success. And thank you one and all. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Saket ji.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here, and I hope all of us have gained
Yes,
something from this.
yes, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.